Well, hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Today on Transform Tuesday, we'll be talking about a couple of things, but a big portion of it will be spent going over the Alpha Transform API. But before we go to that, just a quick reminder, you should have gotten an email, but there is a new version of Alpha Transform. You'll find it in the Apple Store and in Google Play, the Apple App Store. There's also a new version of Transform Central, and even the API has been updated, although not a lot of changes that you'll necessarily see there. So if you haven't updated on your mobile device, sometimes they update automatically. As it turns out, mine didn't, so I had to actually go in and update that manually. But you'll find it there in each of the major stores. So go ahead. And for those of you who helped us during the beta test period, I want to thank you very much for doing so. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the API. And the Transform API is really, really robust. And one of the reasons for that is when we first started designing Transform, maybe 4 years ago, we weren't necessarily thinking about it as a line of business or consumer type of product. We were thinking it more of a developer's product, and we had that in our mindset. Now, as Transform is being developed more and more, it's becoming a perfectly good standalone solution and a low code and no code solution for building out applications that doesn't actually require any other assistance or any other services behind it in order to run. However, you can use other services with the Transform API, and that can make it even more powerful. In some examples that I've done before, I had talked about setting up Transform for an IoT or an Internet of Things application. And in it, we used Transform. I think I've got that on the next slide. Yep, we had Transform to take something from a Raspberry Pi, a very small computer with some sensors attached to it, that would periodically send up some information over to Alpha Transform. And it did it actually by going first through a web service that we had created in the Alpha Cloud. Now, there's copies of these presentations up on the YouTube channel. If you go to the Alpha Transform playlist, you'll find them. And in the examples that I did, I had it basically send out a sensor. The sensor would go to the web service. A web service would create a single record in Alpha Transform. Transform would then report back that it was successful, and we got this records added one form instance. Now that's fine, but the thing to know about Internet of Things data is often there's an awful lot of data coming behind it. So if this was just a once a day thing, it would probably be fine to create a record once a day on Alpha Transform. But you might want to take measurements every hour or maybe even every 5 minutes. So the question there becomes, should you start creating a record for each one? And I think actually the better answer for that is to take those sorts of things and group your data. And I'll show you what I mean here on this next slide. Now, I think everyone here is familiar with setting up an Alpha Transform form. So I'm just going to give you a minute to take a look at what I've done here. And also I'm going to give you a minute to for you to tell me what I did wrong, not exactly wrong, but how I lost a few style points here. What do I always tell you that you're supposed to do? Let me move back up to that slide. Sorry about that. Boink. Any guess what I should have done here when I was setting up this form that I didn't do? Guesses. So that's right. I did not label my fields. So this I called field 1, this field 2. I should have given it a better name. I should have called it location and date when I set it up. Now this is just an example, so there's really no need for me to change it, but just a quick reminder, it's good to label your fields because I keep telling you to do that, and then I didn't do that, so I just want to point that out. So what we've done here in this form is we've created a data group. So at the top level, we have just the location where we're taking the measurements and the date on which the measurements are being taken. But we don't have, but for the measurements themselves, we place them into a data group, which means that we can put in as many readings as we want for a particular day. So here we have the reading time, that's when the reading took place, and then what the actual reading was of the sensor. So that when you look back at this record, you'll be able to see, aha, at 9:15 a.m., we had a reading of, say, 37.2 or some random thing like that, right? Okay, so the question is, if you wanted to use the API to start populating these things, what would you do? How would you do that? Well, let's go take a look at the API and I will show you. Okay, to use the Alpha API, the easiest way to do it is by using our companion product, Alpha Anywhere. Alpha Anywhere you can get free of charge to use. The cost for Alpha Anywhere actually happens when you deploy apps to the Alpha Cloud or onto an Alpha web server. But it is free to use and develop in, and it does have some nice tools for working in TransForm. So if you've got a Windows machine and you're using TransForm, I highly recommend you downloading this piece of free software. You can get it right here at our homepage. You just click on the Build Low Code Apps for Free button, fill in a form, and you can download the software, and off you go. Once you have Alpha Anywhere installed and running, and you've set up a little workspace for you to use, once you have it running, you're going to want to go into the Tools menu, and you're going to go down to where it says Open TransForm API Explorer. And this is a tool that's built into Alpha Anywhere, which is really handy for playing around with the Alpha API before you start writing any code, just to make sure as your proof of concept that the API calls are working the way that you think that they should. So let's go into a live demo and take a look at that right now. So I'm going to pop over here to my remote desktop, and here I am in the TransForm API Explorer. Now, to use the TransForm API Explorer, and in fact, to use the TransForm API at all, you need to get an API key. And those are very handy. So here I tend to use one at the beginning of each of these TransForm Tuesdays and delete them, for security reasons. But you can get them right inside your TransForm account. So the way you do it when you first open this up is you're going to click that Enter API key, and you're going to paste in your API key. And so you might be asking, well, where do I get that API key? Actually, it's really simple. When you log into transform.alphasoftware.com, in other words, your TransForm Central account, and you go to Home, you just scroll down to Get API Key. You click on Get API Key, and then you have these different, what we call scopes. That's the amount of permission that you're giving the API to use. For testing purposes, I just tend to use all possible scopes. That way I can use all possible API calls. When I actually deploy this, though, out to the field, I'm going to want to use a scope that's as limited as possible. So for example, if I just want to be able to create and edit a form instance, that's the permission that we would set for those. And you can use Control-Click to select multiple permissions at once. So just a quick reminder that that's perfectly allowable. When that's done and you click the Get API Key, it's going to display a little button up here that lets you copy that API key into the clipboard. And that's the one that you're going to use back here in Alpha when you paste it in. I've already pasted in my API key. So I got everything up and running before the show. So now we're going to go through and actually start using it. Now, I've given you an example in the past of creating a new form instance. And if you recall, the process behind that was you enter in the form ID, and you can actually choose right here from the list. You don't even have to go back and look it up for this one, which I like a lot. And you put in, let's see, IoT sensors, I think was the one that we chose last time. And then you would assign the person to whom the form is going to go. Because if you recall, every form does need to be assigned to a person, and that happens via their email address. And then lastly, you entered in the data that you want to put there. And the nice thing is that this has got a button here called Sample Form Data, and it'll actually give you an example of what the format is for the JSON, because it's going to require JSON data in order to populate that API. Now, this is what I did before. I was doing create new form instance, but of course the problem with that is that it's going to create a new form instance each time I run that script. What I want to do instead is actually go and see if there already is a record that's been created for the day that I want to record my measurements in. And if there is one that's recorded, I want to edit that and add in a new element into the data group. So I'm not going to write the code for that today, but I am going to take you through the API calls. After all, you may want to write it in a language different than I'm going to write it in. I might do it in Python. Although if you use these API call Explorer, it actually shows you the code that you would need to write if you wanted to do it in Node.js or in XBasic. And actually Node.js is interesting because we could always use it with that code red system, or sorry, node red system that I showed you about 3 weeks ago. Okay, so the first thing I would do in our process, let's imagine our sensor has woken up. Maybe every 5 minutes it's going to report back to the server with a new sensor reading. The first thing I would do is probably see, hey, is there in fact a form that's already been created for today? If there isn't, we could always use that create form instance and create a new form, but maybe there's one already there that I can already use. So what I would do is I would use this API endpoint right here called get form instance array for form ID. So what does that even mean? Well, it means that once I put in a form ID here and I run this, it should give me back all of the instances of that form that have been filled out. Let's take a peek over at my TransForm Central account. I'm going to go over to the Management Console, and you'll see that I actually only have one form instance. Here it is right here. And now I'm going to go back into the designer. We'll double click on that form that I created. And oops, I'm sorry, I don't have to double click. I'm going to stay right here. And I want to grab that form ID. So there it is right there. And that was the one that what I called it when I set up the form. So if I go back now to the TransForm API Explorer and paste in that form ID along with my API key, and I say test, what I'm going to get back is all of the form instances. Really, there's just one. Now, I don't need all the fields. I'm only really interested in what the date is. And that was one of the fields called, I think I called it field 2. And that's why I reminded you earlier on, give your fields sensible names. I should have called that field something like date. I called it field 2, so I just had to remember that. Let me go ahead and hit test. I'll give that a moment to retrieve the data, which I think it has. Cool. And let's do the zoom results window so I can show you this in better clarity. So you'll see it's come back with my form result, and under here, under form data, the one field that it returned is called field 2, and that's got the date in it. So I'd say, aha, this is in fact today's date. It is April 12th. So this is the record that I want to use. I just want to add some data in. I want to add another item into that data group. So the thing I really need to know now is what the primary key is for this record. I can grab it right here, or I could grab it up here where it's also called the form instance ID. Doesn't really matter at all. I'm just going to grab it here. And now, if I go back into the API Explorer, we can go take a look at a different endpoint. Let's take a look at the endpoint called get form data for form instance ID. Now we have that form instance ID. I'm just going to paste that back in. And I'm going to say test. And there's my data. Let's zoom it in. And you'll see here is the form data. So there's the field ID, field 1, which is the headquarters. That's where we're taking our measurements. Field 2, that's the date. And then the data group we called readings. And if you'll see here in readings, there is a reading. I've got 2 entries here in this JSON array. Now I've actually pasted that over here in Notepad earlier so that we can take a look at it a little bit bigger. And I wonder if I can zoom this even more. I think I can. Let's zoom that right up. Why not? So here's my JSON data. It is which starts with an open curly brace, ends with an end curly brace, like all JSON data. The first field is these name value pairs. Field 1, which is headquarters. That is the name of the place that we're taking the measurements. Field 2 is the date. And then we have an array here called readings, which opens with a square bracket and closes with a square bracket. And in between, we have multiple readings. There's reading time 1, reading 2, and now let's say we wanted to put in a reading 3. All we would need to do right now is we would just need to add to this array. So that's actually pretty easy. All I do is I add a comma to the end of this. Now your script will be doing this, but you need to know how to do it manually before you can write a script to do it. And I'm going to put in an open, and I'm basically just going to copy this here. Okay, and let's paste that in. There we go. So my parentheses are all over the place, but that's not a big deal. Now let's say that the time, it's not 10:55. Let's say, what have I got? 1:15. So let's say we're doing that in 13:15. Okay. And let's say the reading is increased to, I don't know, 47. Okay, so there's my data. And you'll see what I've done is I've modified this object and I've inserted this new row here. So let me collect all of my JSON here. I'm going to put that into the clipboard. And we're going to go back into the Alpha TransForm API Explorer. And we're going to use another endpoint. This endpoint is called Change Form Instance Data. And as you might imagine, it's used for changing the data that's in a particular form instance. So this takes two parameters, well, besides the API key. It takes the form instance ID itself. That was the one that I copied, and actually I put that up here, so let me grab it. And I'll paste that in. And the next thing is the form data itself. And I'm going to paste that in next. All right. So here's our data. It now has that extra field. You can validate the JSON to make sure you did it properly. And I did. And now I just hit the test button and it's going to go make that call. And it says rows updated 1. All right. So in theory, everything has worked great for us. We have found that there was already using the getForm instance array for form ID endpoint. We have found that there was in fact a form instance set up for us for today, so that we didn't have to create one. We then used getForm data for form instance ID to retrieve that data, and now we're using this change form instance data with the data that we've updated in the JSON object to send that data back. So let's see, did it work? Let's pop over here to my browser, and I'm going to go over to the management console. And this is the last time this was updated was 2 hours ago. So I know that my last value that I pasted in should be 47.7. So if I've done this properly, I go over to, whoops, I go over here and I refresh my data. All right. And there it is, 47.4, and it was updated at 13:15, about 2 minutes ago. So that worked exactly the way I want it. Now, the great thing is, because this is all in just in one data group, it makes it much simpler later on. I'm not going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of form instances. I'll keep them all nicely collected into a single form. So that's just that's an example of several API things you could do, how you can use it with an IoT thing, and basically what I wanted to show you today. Just wondering if there are any questions. Often they're not. Often I get the questions as soon as it ends, then the questions come in, because that's when you think of it. But I'll give you a minute. It doesn't look like it. All right, cool. Hey, thank you everyone very much for showing up today. We look forward to seeing you at the next TransForm Tuesday. Again, if you do have any questions, send them to tfservice, as in transform service at alphasoftware.com. Sarah, thanks very much for being here. Take care, everyone, and stay well. Bye-bye.